How are you all today? Good. It's nice to have you here today. My name is Kathy Kelly. I'm Education Manager at the Cape Ann Museum, and very pleased to be introducing our introducer today. Today is the 14th Annual Olson Lecture at the Museum. And it's also coming up on the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the gifting of the Maud Olson Library to the museum. For those of you who don't know about the library, it was really the lifelong work of scholar and researcher Maud Olson, Ralph Maud, thank you, who very lovingly and painstakingly collected copies, the same copies of the books that Olson had in his library, that he referred to, that he borrowed to do his work. And that library is now here at the museum. And if anyone's interested in seeing that library or doing some scholarship, please see me afterwards or contact our librarian, Cassie Anderson. But I would like to, before I introduce our introducer, just ask a quick question. Who here, raise of hands, knew Charles Olson or met him? Ah, great, thank you. It's always a really wonderful part of these lectures to make those personal connections. So please join me in welcoming Henry Farini from the Writers Center to the podium. Henry.
Everybody here all right?
Yeah.
It's great to be in this room with all this art, isn't it? Just spectacular. By the way, just a note, the Writers Center brought Olson's, Gregor Gibson, who's in this room in the back there, and I traveled out to Vancouver, put all the stuff in a truck and brought it back to Gloucester, where we were able to hold on to it for many years before we passed it on to the museum. So that's how it ended up in Gloucester. And it's quite an amazing library. Please, if you're interested in Olson scholarship, this is the place to be. So, this is our 14th lecture. And the first one started when we invited Diane Freeman of Gloucester. This was back in 2010. And she gave a great reading at the UU Church. It was a nice house. She was well received, and we remember her coming here dearly. But since Diane was here, we've welcomed poets and scholars from all over the world and around the corner, and some of them started with, that's a little better, Ian Sinclair, Ann Waldman, Amiri Baraka, Michael McClure, Eddie Jones, Ann Charters, Ed Sanders, Stephen Friedman, Emil Alcalay, Sharon Fesson, Charles Stein, and Miriam Nichols. All those we're grateful to the museum for continuing to provide this venue for this event. So thank you, museum. Today's lecture is a special one. I think Vincent Farini would even call it wholly local, and that's wholly with an H, H-O-L-Y, wholly local. All three of our writers have spent much of their lives in the city, living in one place, and living in one place leaves an imprint, especially on writers and artists. So Charles Olson did not grow up in Gloucester. As a boy, he came with his mother from Worcester. He ran a summer boarding house at the edges of Stageford Park. And here's where his imagination caught fire. Ultimately, our city becomes a lens through which Olson examines the relationship between the individual and the history that shapes their identity. The poems explore place, history, economics, and community. The restless and unpredictable ocean became more than a view. Its shifting tides offer a metaphor to the boundless reaches of our imagination. So today, we're going to hear from Amanda Cook, James Cook, and David Rich three writers who are rooted here in Gloucester. For many years, Gloucester has served as a site of celebration, interrogation, and renewal of Olson's work. James Cook will consider Gloucester as a living nexus of poetic exchange, where writers including Garrett Lansing and Peter Anastas enter into dialogue with a poet and continue to ask, in Olson's words, what remains of essential use. Amanda Cooks, author of Ironstone Whirligig, will read sections of her ongoing poem-by-poem response to Maximus' poems, much of which have been appeared in the magazine Spoke. David Rich, editor of Charles Olson Letters from Home, 1949 to 1969, will provide context for Olson's legacy in Gloucester and join us afterwards for a question and answer conversation. Thank you for all for coming out, and with that, I'd like to bring up James Cook. James.
Thank you, Henry. That was beautiful. Okay, so I'm just to lay out the event here. I'm going to say a few words to set some of the themes of the event, and then introduce Amanda, who will read poems from her ongoing poem-by-poem response to Charles Olson's Maximus poems. Kevin Gallagher, who has been publishing them in Spoke, is in the house. Thank you for that, Kevin. Pick up your copies of Spoke. After that, I will then give a talk in which I lay out some of the ways that Gloucester has responded to Olson from the 1995 celebration at City Hall and the Lyceum Library up to now. Then Dave will join me, and he will fill in that period of time from Olson's passing up to 95. And then I'll be asking Dave and Amanda a couple questions about their own work. The theme here is live goods. So I'll get right into setting the themes. Live goods, or to be of essential use, as Henry quoted Olson. It's a little bit different to do these kinds of talks with Charles Olson, in the sense that this work is, the work that we do now is not about putting Olson into a fixed museum state. It is not about making a Chamber of Commerce version of Charles Olson to sell, but it is about an active engagement. Sometimes that active engagement is inspirational, and sometimes we're mad at him for some reason. We are talking back, we're critiquing, and we're wrestling with things that are challenging. So it's about the ongoing engagement with his work and with who he was as a person as well. I was able to inherit that approach through two very important people, Peter Anastas and Garrett Lansing. Garrett gave me the version of Charles Olson that is about sacramental attention and care, a focus on the world we find ourselves in and finding what is beautiful, what is heavenly, what is eternal, what is generative in whatever we find around us, and what we find in our interactions, and what we find composting under the surface in our history. Garrett gave me the sacramental attention Olson, and so I would read Olson with that view. Peter gave me the civic engagement aspect of Olson. The Olson that wrote into the Gloucester Daily Times. The Olson also who was rector and teacher at Black Mountain College. And as somebody who has been a teacher and principal at Gloucester High School, that's an Olson that Peter gave me as well as the larger civic engagement in the life of this community and the community in relation to the nation and the world. So the sacramental attention and the civic engagement that I found in Olson really, for me, I realized in preparing the talk, come through the lens I got from Garrett and from Peter. And you'll hear after Amanda's poems a bit more about that in the next phase. When we talk about Olson as live goods, there is no better example of that than Amanda's poem-by-poem response to the Maximus poems, in which you can find Olson's words filtered through Amanda's view of Gloucester and our world now. As a woman, as a mother, as a deeply civic engaged and somebody who finds this sacramental attention, brings the sacramental attention to everything around her, Olson is heard and interrogated and brought, kicking and screaming sometimes, into the 21st century through Amanda's words. Like much of the work that I'll highlight today, Amanda's work begins in an encounter with Olson and the Maximus poems, but zooms far beyond that and more deeply than just being an encounter. And that's why people continue to be compelled by these poems. I'll share with, some people were there when Catherine Bayliss asked me to give a talk last September for the John Bayliss Society. I decided to read some of Amanda's poems as part of my talk. They were the biggest hit. So when I was asked by the museum, thank you Martha for inviting me, Martha Oakes who invited me to give this talk, I knew that I had to have Amanda present her poems here to begin this idea of how are we dealing with Olson as live goods. So without further ado, Amanda, come on up.
I don't think there could be a more intimidating room full of people I care about. Boy, this is a lot. Thank you, James, and thank you to the Cape May Museum and to the Writers Center for bringing this together. I'm going to set my timer off. I'm going to start with the first poem I wrote in this series and end with the last poem I've written so far, and hit a lot of places between there. So, here we go. I, Maximus of Gloucester, to you. 1. I am reading your poems. It isn't that I haven't read them before, but I am reading them again, this time with care and attention and all the other words in my eyes. I am trying to make up with you, forgive you as if you need my forgiveness. I am trying to mark the edges of your shadows so I can see where my Gloucester falls in it. Scholars, please stop here. This isn't for you. 2. I am taking liberties. When the poem makes me think of the kitten we buried on 10 Pound Island because there was no land available to us at our first apartment on Mason Court, I will write about it. About how the woman downstairs wouldn't let the pregnant cat in when the storm was howling outside. About how we let her in and she gave birth, and when the storm was over, she went outside and came back with the kitten, soaking wet, too weak to nurse. We warmed it and fed it with a dropper, and it died. 3. By ear. I have listened to men talk about you more than I have listened to your words. I am sitting in Vincent Farini's house reading Catherine Bayliss's copy of the Maximus poems. I am leaving Butterick in the legal box on the daybed. 4. Born. It occurs to me just now that I was born via C-section. I wonder if my grandfather delivered me. I wonder if he delivered Charlie. My own daughter wore your granddaughter's pants to school today. This is a form I take these days. Wash, fold, cook, clean. That too is a form of love. 5. Love is not easy. My closest friends growing up moved away. My closest friends now came to this place from somewhere else. That is a lie. There are some from here and some who stayed, but it is not easy. 6. It is raining outside. I don't want to prove myself to you. Poetry is so much a game of one-upsmanship these days, and my list of victories is weak. I can tell you, I have cooked for and cleaned up after some of the best one-upsmen of our day. One night I left them talking in my kitchen and went squid fishing at the state fish pier. We drank wine and ran from the big dock down to the walkways between the boats and up again. When we got home with a couple pounds of squid, they were still talking. We pulled garlic from the garden and cleaned the squid and cooked it, and we called a Norwegian cab driver to come over, and in between the poets and the cab driver and the squid fishers, we each had a few bites to eat. Letter 23. The facts. I have been worrying lately over the facts, the things we know to be true. No ideas but in the statue of a man at the wheel, a boarded-up building, a train running late. Some men came here, that much we can agree on. Dorchester or Plymouth, 1623 or 24. Some men came here. This mythos or logos or both. Some men came here and claimed here, and the people who are here have been shouting about it ever since. I am here. And when here changes, be it the houses on the boulevard being razed, or the fires that took the hotels in Magnolia, or more recently the pizza place, or the splitting of a boulder at Flat Rocks during a storm, when the here changes, we mourn what we have lost, then we forget that there was a here before now. Still, we love our history, the history we can see, and we love the history we have pictures of or stories of, neatly written in logbooks or printed in books of poetry. This history is its own kind of commerce, a hierarchy of belonging, of ownership. What kind of captains are we? When we sail out of the harbor, we should be looking forward, not back. Let us not misname as principles our fear. Stiffening in the master's founder's wills. How quickly men come and how quickly make declarations, as if it was their feet that made the ground firm. I remember as a child trying to walk as quietly as I could, quiet as an Indian, through the woods. The beauty was in that quiet, in not leaving a mark. Now it is all a fiction. My mark is undeniable. Each action, each step leaves a mark. Every privilege I have comes at somebody's expense. I was walking on stolen paths. Maximus from Dogtown, 1. Sitting on the rocks of Ledgemont Ave, looking out over the city, a friend says she is not of the ocean. I am of that place where the ocean meets the rocks, I tell her, a soft, rounded rock hidden by the tide. She is a rock in the stream, she says, partially underwater, with a tree growing at its side. I can see the rock she means, and the tree, and the water running over it, the stream running down across the path toward the Babson Reservoir, watered rock. I grew up with a different story, a different death. She wasn't proud or drunk, she was a woman. I was 8 when my mother put the fear of Dogtown in me. Of all the places I wasn't allowed to go, Dogtown was the only one I feared. That path, up from Cherry Street, sometimes flooded, now dry, was the first path I walked myself in Dogtown. The only path I walked myself in Dogtown. He killed her with a rock. Then, in a way, he opened the earth and stuck her in. Further up the path from James Mary, the rocks had been dragged and dropped by a glacier, moraine trail. He dragged her body, then shoved her face into the ground. The woman, Anne, her name is all over these woods. I was 8 years old. My father had left a few years before. My mother did what she could. She needed help. We were not sheltered. Irksy, drunk, chainsaw in hand, busting into the kitchen, demanding pay for mowing the lawn. A Murray jumping from behind the trees, chasing us up or down the lane. They scared us, but we were not afraid of them. My friends walk the woods alone or with dogs. I will walk with them, but not alone. Why shouldn't a woman walk in the woods? They laughed at him. Mary laughed. And Peter, they laughed at him too, bullied him. How hard the rocks, how soft the earth. He had been hanging around our place. I don't know where the picture is. I can't put my hands on it now, but I remember my sister in the middle of reading the book about the murder, asking me to look at the picture, seeing his face, remembering him. All the stars at night, the trees, the rocks, terminal moraine. I wish my mother had been more careful of the fear she put into me. Instead of the wooded paths of Dogtown, I wish she had warned me of the men who learn to walk behind you so quietly you can't hear their steps. A note on the above. I keep trying to get away from that poem about Mary, about the woods. I keep trying to shake it. I did the dishes, washed the floor. That's a lie. I haven't even swept. But in this poem, my floor is clean. The point is, I can't shake it. Can't shake how different it is for a woman and a man to walk in the woods. How Maximus, hearing the woods sing, thinks they are singing for him. And when she opens up, Our Lady, she knows herself as she is, and not in the context of your sex. Something was recited, something revealed. What a mother must do, what a daughter does, the serpent, the feeding, the rotting, the rape, the ache when a child is lost, the hollow that forms to hold it all. Willie, I hear you in this one. I can't help it. At the boundary of the mighty world, H.T. 6-2 follows. Up on gravelly hill, this is my head, Athena, my head pushing up from beneath the rocks, under the earth, my head, the back of my neck, the curve you see when I look down. And my arms outstretched, my right arm down the path, my right hand turned outward, the elbow toward Cherry Street, my forearm pressed against the Sportsman's Club, the ricochet of bullets, the string of pearls a young man offered me there when I was 13. Do not trespass, do not. My left arm bent, Babson Reservoir in its crook, my chest, my heart pressed into the ground in a ring of words, never try, never. Leave me alone. My head is down, my body stretches, the sway of my back, the swamp of my belly, get out, it is not bad. The positions of my body, the imposition of my body when there is any condition imposed, leave me alone. I am covering this hill, there is water, it is running, it is wet, I am on fire. It is not bad to be pissed off. I am covering this hill, blackberry thorns and wintergreen, spiritual power. I am stretched out, north, toes in the quarries, blueberries crushed beneath my knees, white lady slipper. Leave me alone. Trails like veins, like blood running, and the water runs down the trail, spring mud, courage, kindness, the way nobody interrupts you when you read a poem, the way you read louder if they try. Ideas, get out, leave me alone. I am a mess of rocks and sticks and water and bone. I am a bullfight, a child lost in the woods. I will never know myself fully, afraid to go down certain paths, see men in denim. Get out. Gravelly Hill says, get out. My back, my shoulders, my face pressed into the ground. Leave me alone. Untie your purse strings, cast out what you are keeping inside. Fill your pockets with rocks. Stephen's song. Morning gloom, kitchen table clutter, everything heavy. I am heavy under the weight of it. Who is hired and fired? Who has disappeared? The weight of a king he could not give allegiance to. Preparing for scarcity for my children, my children's names. The neighbor's dog is barking. The coffee pot is empty. I have to get to work. Truth and beauty in the face of destruction. Slaves and rainbows, all the colors. Who is lifted up on shoulders and who is sent away from the parade? There are cracks in the foundation, in our founding, the paternity. The scale is broken. Parade in front, all cocksure, parade in front in the emperor's new clothes. I make smaller poems, drop the names of the gods, think more about the vulgar. I go to more differently. Signature to petition on 10-Pound Island asked of me by Mr. Vincent Perini. To be clear, when Vincent said in front of a group of great writers and readers, "Politics is the manure of the Pegasus," he was not wrong. Coles Island for Ann Charters. I went there to Coles Island with Annie. We went to your grave the same day. I could feel it there, past the great gate, past the signs marked private. A little up the hill, around a corner, there was a tree. I can't say how I knew, but I knew that tree. I felt like a shadow, a dappled sun, like some trespasser who sees a secret thing and can't find the words to say quite what he saw, all of it. We didn't dare get out of the car, but we drove slowly, daring anybody to kick us out. Nobody bothered. If we had stayed, we could have become rock or gnarled branches. We would have drowned in green. I go back sometimes to draw the heaviness from my head to my heart. It welcomes me, that winding road. It turns me around and out quietly, the way people with money can afford to speak softly. Poem 143, The Festival Aspect. We are fractured more than divided, shattered like Babel, looking at each other like we have two heads. Is it a peach, a rock, a prayer, a flag? Should I be quiet and not scare the birds away, or will I disappear? We are safe here because the people don't read poetry. Or we are not safe here, but we don't know it yet. Or it doesn't matter if we are safe here. Nobody is safe. I start small, the things I can touch from where I am sitting, then the cup in the sink in the other room, the mail to run back to the neighbor. Outside, I can hear people grumbling about the truth, about good and evil, about the price of eggs. This is where we do the work, here, at the kitchen tables, walking in the fading daylight, stretching with the tide. September 18th, 2025, pressing my ear to the ground. Thank you.
Okay. I will admit, while putting this together, this was hard. So, hearing so much history and life lived, composted into Amanda's poems and into the research, and remembering that I did in preparing for this 1995 to today talk. I'll try to keep it together up here. Okay, so right before Amanda read, I laid out these two threads. One that I found in Garrett Lansing's writing initially, and then in his own words about Charles Olson, this idea of the sacramental attention, or as Amanda cited from Olson's letter 6, attention and care, and from Peter, an extension of that into civic engagement that takes the form of political endeavor, conventional kinds of political endeavor that have been important to me, and also engagement through teaching. which was something that was important to Olson, important to Peter, but Garrett always maintained that he wasn't a teacher, even though he was teaching us all the time, that he was adamant that he was not a teacher. Okay, so we're going to launch from there, and I'm going to take you back now to August 12th, 1995. It was a Saturday. The Charles Olson Festival was being held in the City Hall auditorium. There were 2 sessions with a reception at the library in between. The first session from 2 to 4 p.m., the second from 8 to 10. The first session was a panel discussion, the second readings that were given at that time. I had met Amanda earlier that year on February 13th, to be precise, after a literature class at Emerson College with David Daniel, the terrific professor and poet who recently read at the Gloucester Writers Center earlier this year. Earlier that year, I had met David while he was still a student at Gloucester High School. Amanda brought me down to the Hancock Theater in Boston, where GHS Thespians had just performed The Bald Soprano. They had made it through to the State's Drama Festival competition finals down there in Boston, and that's where I met Dave, all 1995 before the festival. Then on the day I graduated from Emerson College, May 16th, 1995, I moved here that very day. Brought everything up to Cape Ann that day, and I've been here since. By August, I was working at the Glass Sailboat on Duncan Street in the morning, and at Friendly's, right there at Grant Circle, in the evening. 60 to 80-hour weeks, to afford rent, to afford to be up here. And I was living on Mason Court, very close to the library, behind the library. But on the morning of the festival, I was, for a reason lost to time, returning to Gloucester from Boston on the commuter rail, with my train arriving close to 2, the beginning of the event. I speed walked from Railroad Ave to Dale Ave, ascended the City Hall stairs to the auditorium doors. It was packed. Couldn't get in. Seats all filled, people were standing up all along the edge to the back. Many of you were there that day. When I got to the top of the stairs there, my good college friend and terrific poet, Christopher Rizzo, whose poems Of Love and Capital were selected for the Bob Kaufman Book Prize. Chris Rizzo, back then, we had just graduated, but I hadn't seen him since graduation, and he was standing right there at the top of the stairs. So this was things. I got there on time, met Chris, and like I said, there was an electricity in the air. The room was packed. And the accounts from the time suggest that most of the people there were local. So this meant something for what was possible in a life of poetry here in Gloucester where I just arrived a few months before. So like I said, I got there in time for the panel discussion. On the panel were Ingeborg Lauterstein, Ed Sanders, Robert Creeley, Jean Kaiser, and Hetty Jones, with Peter Anastas as the moderator. There are several accounts of the day that you can read online, personal accounts. There's also a transcript at charlesolson.org, where a lot of the minutes from Ralph Maud's Charles Olson Society, based in Canada, can be found. So again, charlesolson.org if you want to see the transcript. In the panel discussion, Peter's concept of Olson's civic engagement was front and center in the title. The title identified Olson as poet, teacher, scholar, and community activist. And I want to just make just a couple points about this beginning for me and its influence on the years to come. One is the concept of the gift of Olson and also the burden of Olson. And I want to say something also about the nature of the political engagement. During the panel discussion, that again Peter Anastas moderated, Peter quotes Olson as, in response, Peter's talking about going on to grad school, and Peter quotes Olson as saying, "There's a graduate school right here at this table." And I felt that way about Peter and Garrett, even though, again, Garrett denied being a teacher all the time. But I felt that way about coming to Gloucester in the years to follow, although I hadn't really met Peter or Garrett yet at this point. On the burden side, Vincent cites Charles Bohr, who hosted Olson in Storrs, Connecticut, near the end of Olson's life, saying, so this is Vincent quoting Charles Bohr. Vincent says, quoting Charles, "There was no let-up in your demand for attention. I began to be consumed by you." Charles Bohr is referring to Olson. "I began to be consumed by you, drained, devoured." And that's one of the things that I've kept in mind and would talk to both Garrett and Peter about throughout the years, is a sense of, this was especially a conversation I had with Peter, about not wanting to be consumed or devoured by the interest in figuring out the Maximus poems, in hunting down some of the more difficult passages and figure out what's behind Olson's work himself, and not get stuck into that, while still finding enough to find what is generative, what is the spark, what's exciting there in the work, but being concerned about being devoured, consumed, drained by the engagement with Olson. And Vincent knew that and said that at this very first event in 1995. Neither Peter nor Garrett ever made such demands. Never did I feel drained, devoured, consumed in that way. Vincent sometimes did make demands. That's a different story, and maybe something for another day or for after the talk. With regard to the civic engagement aspect of Olson that was present that day in the panel, Peter posed the question, and Robert Creeley, Vincent Farini again, and Ed Sanders all had something interesting to say on that account. Creeley said, "Olson had great antipathy for what he called epicene poets, poets who did not enter or participate directly in the conduct of society. That sense of being apart in some particular way. He loathed that. He has consistently both habit and practice of politics. Politics are a very decisive part of his imagination and conduct." And then Vincent said, Charles emphasized the seeing in the visionary sense, and went on to talk about Olson as deciding to teach the teachers to keep alive this vision, even if a larger group of people couldn't hear what he had to say at the time. Vincent emphasized on that day, Olson teaching the teachers, and emphasizing then, what do we do with the sight, the insight? Sanders became a bit more specific and named several themes, political themes, current in 1995, that can be found dealt with in Olson's poetry. Ed Sanders mentioned absentee ownership, a sustainable economy, urban renewal, filling wetlands, and really sort of dug into some of the particular manifestations and ways, again, of using a way that Olson's work can be live goods for attending to the politics of our time. 1995, just a couple of months after I graduated from Gloucester High School, it was exciting to hear about a poet who was engaged in, like I said, sacramental attention and the political engagement, civic engagement in this way. My head at this time was filled with reading the Uruguayan leftist writer Eduardo Galeano, who wrote these terrific prose poems as a history of the Americas, ending with the 20th century, the century of the wind, that work was foremost in my mind, and it is really through Galeano and other Latin American poets that I was approaching Olson's work and being invited into that work by the speakers at City Hall on that day. At that time, on August 12, 1995, there was a break, and then in that evening, there were readings of and about Olson. Schuyler Hoffman did the introductions. Garrett Lansing, Hetty Jones, Robert Creeley, and Ed Sanders gave readings that evening. Although there are interesting things to be said about each reader and reading, as a formative and generative focus of that evening for what would come for me in the next 30 plus years, I'm going to focus on Garrett. That night, Garrett read from Olson's letters to the Gloucester Daily Times that were put together in a book by Peter Anastas, published by Gregor Gibson's 10 Pound Island Books. And Garrett wrote a preface. It is my recollection that he read his forward, which is just a 2-page essay that was pivotal for my sense of how to be a fully engaged person in the world, particularly in the polis, this place I had just come to. And so I want to read directly from Garrett's essay now, because it was, like I said, so pivotal in creating the live goods. So this is a key passage from Garrett's foreword in Charles Olson, Maximus to Gloucester, the letters and poems of Charles Olson to the editor of the Gloucester Daily Times, 1962 to 1969. Garrett writes, like Whitman, it seems to me, he took with grace whatever was presented to him and rolled it over in his consideration. Dream constellations as well as the dreck of the streets. If one thought in terms of sacrament, and as a child Charles had absorbed an awareness of sacrament, it was a kind of sacrament of the chance presentation of existence that he met anew every day. Martin Buber, in an essay that I read when I first knew Charles, expressed what seemed to me a truth about Olson. The man of sacramental existence is no magician. He exerts no power, but performs a service, the service. What is important in the sacramental sense? The answer, whatever a man happens to concern himself with. And the momentary, when it is taken seriously in its momentary unique contingency, proves to be that which cannot be anticipated or prepared for. The man of sacramental existence is aided by no acquired rules and rhythms, by no traditional methods, no special knowledge or aptitude. He must continually withstand the unforeseen and unforeseeable moment. He must continually, in the outflowing moment, offer release, fulfillment to a thing or creature encountered. And he can effect no selection, no division, since it is not for him to decide what will come his way and what will not. Unlike W.B. Yeats, Garrett goes on, Charles did not desire, I think, to be a magician, nor did he claim any power that was not magnified human power. He wished to be unaware and remained unaware in a kind of negative capability of the services he performed. And because he did not fear self-indulgence, he gave himself without stint to the painful point of sacrifice. Such a terrific 2 pages. And regardless of how true we find that to be in our encounters with Olson's work, what Garrett wrote there became a kind of a place for me to return, something to live up to, in every aspect of my life, bringing that kind of attention, that quality of hearing, of seeing, of being present, and see whatever comes, right? Whatever comes one's way, which is different than the work of a magician. It is finding in what comes, what is beautiful, what is necessary to build a life on. Okay. Before moving into the next phase of the story, I want to zoom in again. Move this. It's a little bit from the festival that day. But I'm going to zoom in. I had to select just a handful of things to zoom in on. I want to zoom in again to the idea that during this period, many of us were getting Olson directly in the work, but we were also getting him through others' eyes. Through Peter and Garrett, as I've said already, but there's also Jonathan Baylis's account of Ipsissimus Charlemagne, his Charles Olson figure in the Gloucester Men tetralogy. In 1997, I read Gloucester book, published in 1992, and in it I found another Olson. In idea itself, you see, the important thing is the seeing, not the subject or object of seeing. There's this whole wonderful passage in Gloucester book in which this idea of the kind of bringing the attention to the object and bringing it alive through the seeing, through the encounter, is captured by Jonathan Baylis in this fictional rendering of Charles Olson that rhymes with, that connects to Garrett's vision, or Garrett's view. Although the rhetoric used by the two writers is so very different. Then Jonathan does this little turn where Charlemagne here, also called Doc, is talking to Caleb. And Caleb is given an assignment by the Charlemagne figure. And like many of us, this idea that Vincent brought up of being given an assignment by Charles Olson, Caleb bristles with annoyance at the idea of his future tillage of ideas subsumed in advance by a leader who would not deign to drive the stakes for the terrain he claimed. So it's this, like being given a job and feeling that burden. But Caleb here is palliated by Charlemagne's sympathetic and maternal voice to take on this charge or this job that he has been given. And so again, thinking is the theme of the talk of the different ways that Charles Olson work becomes this kind of both gift and burden. There is something in this about the attraction and repulsion of being subsumed by Olson's work, even long after his passing. Okay, let's move on now to the new millennium. In the years after the 1995 Olson Festival, inspired by the words and commitments of the participants and spurred by the interest and attention of the large, mostly local audience, there's a period for me and for others of intense investigation into the concept of polis in particular. Working at the glass sailboat, I see Peter regularly. Sort of for the backstory here is that Peter seeks me out to encourage me as a writer after I read a Neruda-inspired poem for Amanda's aunt and family at a memorial service for her aunt, Judy Lacey. After that, Peter comes up to me, encourages me about my poetry, and we begin to see each other regularly at the glass sailboat. We talk about our reading and goings-on around town, and Peter's introduction to the Charles Olson Maximus to Gloucester, those letters to the Gloucester Daily Times, is particularly important for me in honing my thinking about the relationship between poetry and polis, imaginative labor and civic engagement. Among other things, I was puzzling out what aspects of Olson's approach felt like a dead end, no matter how brilliant, and what aspects were generative. In this time period, I also began seeing Garrett regularly. I met him at the glass sailboat, and then in May of 1996, he invited me to his house on Western Avenue, across from the far entrance to Stage 4 Park. Our conversation is wide-ranging. He asks me about my reading and my interests. We talk about my Catholic upbringing, which he compares with John Wiener's. I remember this, though, and little else from that first meeting. The atmosphere is electric, his attention is intense, and he gives me a copy of Heavenly Tree, Soluble Forest, the then current version of his ongoing life project of poetry, the current version then of the Heavenly Tree. And he writes, "For James, May 16th, 1996, with pleasure at our meeting." These are two beginnings. And at the same time, I'm reading the Maximus poems and the essays I can get a hold of at the library. I'm at the library a lot. And it wasn't a systematic study, because I'm also writing poems in response to Olson. I scribble poems and essay fragments on Friendly's guest checks, as I'm working at Friendly's at the time. And then in 1997, Amanda and I began Polis magazine, which you can see some of the pictures up here, posting an announcement around town. Folks like Willie Alexander, who had not yet moved back to Gloucester, responded with encouraging enthusiasm. And Willie also sent me a whole bunch of CDs. Garrett invited me to various readings, including the Stone Soup readings at T.T. the Bears in Cambridge, where I met John Landry and Jim Dunn, who's here in the front row with us, and Chuck Stein. Amanda and I met Joe Torra and Bill Corbett at a Zolan Press reading for our professor, the first poet laureate of Boston, Sam Cornish, at this time. And there's a lot going on in the city. Art Space on Center Street. The Stage Company is hosting open mics. Greg Cook, the artist, is putting out his Oatmeal Journal zine with contributors from across the country. And those were just some of the nodes of activity at the time. It was a time of beginnings. Greg Cook, as you can see here, is the artist and journalist, and he did the covers for Polis 1 and for Polis 3, so the two that are on the left there. Greg, often we talk now about the sort of portal that's opened up when you attend your first art event. And that after walking through that portal, how everything is different on the other side. This was that kind of time. It was walking through a portal to a life that hadn't seemed possible just a year before. Especially for those of us who didn't grow up in a life with art and literature as part of it. In these years, Amanda and I got married. I attended Tufts University to become a teacher. First Cambridge Rindge Latin, then Hamilton Wenham, and finally where I wanted to end up here at Gloucester High School. And we managed to organize several Polis readings at the bookstore, who were generous hosts for us. Amanda referred to an incident from one of those readings earlier, at which Garrett Lansing gave this tremendous reading. His voice was, sort of amazing. He really kind of inhabited and brought to life these poems from the most recent version of the Heavenly Tree. And then Vincent Farini got up, took the microphone, and said, "Politics is the manure of the Pegasus," and sat down. That was the whole reading. That was the mic drop, trump card, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. As Amanda quoted earlier. Shortly after this time period, we published the first Polis. We published some pieces from it at these readings before that and published Polis 1 in 2002. Dave Rich, who is here in the front row and we'll be hearing from later, with Lisa Rich, published Process magazine, as well as smaller zines that came after Process. You can see those on the right. So this in the just before the turn of the millennium and after was a period of this kind of production. I'll also just move forward. Kevin, do you recognize Nevertheless up there? And so you can see Nevertheless, which Kevin Gallagher put out with Gloucester Writers, a beautiful cover by Carrie Percival. And on the left is Patrick Dowd's magazine, The Pleasure Beast. Underutilized Species was another zine project that I did around this time with a beautiful photograph by Jane Cunningham on the cover. Around this time, to get back to the civic engagement side of things, I also, at Gloucester High School in 2004, began the Gloucester Arts and Culture Multi-Genre Writing Project, which has continued in some form at Gloucester High School ever since, even during my time as principal, thanks to Kim Trigilio's 11th grade AP English language classes, and I'll be returning to that this year. I wrote about the GHS project in an essay called To Find Out for Yourself, Maximus at Gloucester High School. This was a project put together by Jim Dunn and Kevin Gallagher as part of the Mass Raw Poetry from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 2012. But the project actually started in 2004. The gist of the project is that students research an aspect of Gloucester art or culture. They write things like an annotated bibliography, interviews and oral history, personal essay, researched argument, poems, one-act plays. They've made documentary films, written letters to the editors, they've created websites, making meaning and personal meaning and creative engagement out of the research, whatever they find. When I wrote about this project, I sort of explained the heart of it this way. I tell my students explicitly that Gloucester is not the only ground for such finding out. Wherever they travel, wherever they'll live, there will be opportunities for exploration of those places too. I often draw their attention to the poet Robin Blazer in Henry Fellini's film, Polis Is This. Blazer reports that when he told Olson he'd been looking into Gloucester's history, Olson responded, "Oh, don't do that. This is my place. Go do it for yours." We might investigate whatever places are ours, places we're born in, places we come to during the summers of our childhood, as Charlie says about his father in Henry's film. Summers of our childhood and later live in. Places we move to when we graduate from college, as I did, following my then girlfriend, now wife, back to her hometown. Places we're driven to understand no matter why. I didn't create the project to inculcate my students with civic pride, but rather to give them a chance to find out for themselves and to project an understanding of a geography of their being. At the end of this section, in these years, I just want to mention the importance of Garrett's house on Western Avenue as being so vital to the sense of the rich exchange of ideas and poetry and lives during this time period. Garrett generously hosting parties with often a great deal of the hidden labor done by Amanda and others, at which many poems and plans and possibilities, friendships and correspondences were first germinated and later nourished. The zines that I mentioned before, all of these magazines that were put out during loosely this time period, also had that spirit of meeting people, exchanging poems, putting them out for each other to keep this life going when so much of the rest of life was hostile towards these possibilities. And Garrett's house was a place where those possibilities lived. All right. So, in addition to the proliferation of the small magazines and the launch of the Gloucester Project at Gloucester High School and the Lansing Verse on Western Avenue, I want to mention in this time period that leads up to the centennial celebration of Olson, I want to mention Henry's film, Polis Is This. I'm cutting out a little bit about more detail about those magazines, but I'd be happy to talk with anyone about Polis and process, and nevertheless, a whole history and talk can be done just on the people published there, the essays written there, the various engagements of those that are in magazines. But I did want to make space for during this time period that leads up to the 2010 centenary, Henry's film, Polis Is This. The film, informative and imaginative.
Hey James, I gotta let the audience know that it's Henry and Kenny Riab.
Kenny Riab, yep.
No.
Yes. A film by Henry Farini and Kenny Riab. Henry, I guess because you're in the house, I'm just emphasizing. Kenny's here? All right. Hey, Kenny. How you doing? All right. So the film, Henry and Ken's film is informative and imaginative, and in the words of the poet, editor, and raconteur Bill Corbett, he called it the best film about an American poet ever made. And it deserves to be watched and rewatched. There is so much in it, and its spirit is such that it points from its own richness out to the richness of Olson's work, and to the richness of the people in the film. The people encountered in the film. It's a nutrient-rich compost and a celestial constellation. And I just want to mention that Peter and Garrett were dedicated to this project, and it was really in the spirit of helping Kenny and Henry's film that the Charles Olson Society of the United States was formed. Garrett was really, in talking about this, Garrett was really adamant that the Charles Olson Society that was formed at that time would not be about sort of creating, like I've said before, a conservation of Olson's memory. Ralph Maude actually had at this time, he wanted to buy 28 Fort Square and turn it into a museum for Olson. Garrett did not want that. But both Garrett and Peter saw in the film and in Henry and Ken's project something that was live goods, something that was itself a work of art, and that would bring Olson in the right way, in this way that points towards an active, ongoing engagement, and bring that to a larger group of people. During these years, in talking about this, Garrett would say that over and over again. He did not like to be part of societies and that sort of thing, but for this film, he was engaging in this work. For my part, it was a tremendous experience where a handful of times Henry engaged with my students. He took them out, did a walk one time, and in various ways engaged with students who were working on that Gloucester project that I mentioned earlier, in getting their sense of this as the film took various shapes and forms. Henry, the archive of what didn't make the film must be vast and kind of unbelievable, right?
Hopefully it'll end up here sometime.
There we go. The reason I wanted to put these things together here, the film, the work that's happening at Gloucester High School, these zines, is to talk about just some of, this isn't exhaustive by any means, some of the ways that Olson's work and engagement with Olson lived during this period that then leads up to the centennial in 2010. So with the centennial in 2010, there are just a handful of things that I want to mention at this point. I want to mention the just tremendous range of events that took place during that time. There was the Olson study group that I did with Peter at the bookstore. There was an installation at the White Ellery house. Susan Aroney, who's here with us, The Man Who Loved Gloucester, and The Big O by Paul Carey Goldberg. There was David's book, which I think I have up here. Charles Olson, Letters Home, published by the museum and an event at the museum that took place on October 3rd. Various readings of and by Gloucester writers, a marathon reading that happened at the Independent Christian Church. There's the book, Little Charlie Goes to Gloucester, with event with author Henry Farini, again, event here at the museum. Town meeting discussions, screening of Ken and Henry's film, Polis Is This, poetry readings, in various readings with Diane DePrima and Michael Rumacher, a walk, of course, and a production of Apollonius of Tyana, a dance play with Sarah Slifer, Mark Wagner, and others, including a performance by Willie Alexander. I mention all of those just to give a sense of the vast kind of array of people who are dealing with Olson's poetry at the time. I think that the syllabus that Peter put together with some help from me for the study group, Packed Houses at the Bookstore downtown, is also worth checking out. Olson100.blogspot.com still has the accounts of these various events, including the syllabus. But I'll leave that for another time. I do want to draw folks' attention to Charles Olson Letters Home. And there are two particular letters in the exchange between Joe Garland and Charles Olson that David included. The title of the talk that includes the phrase live goods can be found in a letter that Olson writes to Garland on September 21st, 1968. And then on September 27th, 1968, Olson refers to living in Ward 4 and heaven simultaneously, which I think, again, as the letters are filled with these charged poetic moments, and those are two that helped sort of as guiding lights for this particular event. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on from those. Okay. The last sort of thing that I want to mention from 2010 is from an event that happened in Worcester in 2010. Again, it's an Olson Centennial event in Worcester. So this book by Ibierto Yepes, El Imperio de la Neomemoria, had just come out with a critique of Olson's time in Mexico, exploring the imperialist and neo-colonial implications of Olson's work. And it was in Spanish. And some folks were sort of translated for themselves parts of the book before, in 2013, the full English translation came out. And I wanted to refer to this because when Don Wellman, the poet and scholar Don Wellman, translated an excerpt from this and shared it at the Worcester conference at Clark University, there was quite an uproar. You know, it was seen as kind of an attack on Olson and this sort of thing. But you know, it was really important to those of us in attendance that we are able to enter into these kinds of critiques, that we are not in the business, so to speak, of simply praising, turning Olson into a saint, deciding that everything that was done was worth defending, but actually encountering this work so it can be live goods for the current time. And Don really demonstrated that day. Again, he translated a portion of this, read it that day for the consideration of those gathered, so that we could, and some folks were launching into a defense, other folks were agreeing with aspects of the translation. But it shows that this work is about the live goods and the ongoing engagement, shown even more clearly in Amanda's work. All right, so 2010 was that fruitful year with a tremendous amount happening. Immediately after that, in 2011, as Henry mentioned earlier, Ian Sinclair came and gave the second of these lectures that I'm 14th of. Some of what happened during that visit ends up in this book, American Smoke. Right? So these lectures, interestingly, end up being referred to in Sinclair's book, which is focused on various encounters in the United States. He's an English writer. Okay, let's cut to... in American Smoke, 2013, based on this 2011 visit, he describes Garrett Lansing as alert, youthful in style and sweater, but outside time. Like a Marsden Hartley portrait in an upstairs room at Cape Ann Museum, growing a little younger, a little smoother with each passing year. I think there's a reference to a certain Oscar Wilde novel in that. I think we have a Dorian Gray situation in what Sinclair has written there. Garrett was this sort of person who did seem to grow a little bit younger all the time, right? Sinclair goes on to reference the sort of after this event, people gathered down at Alchemy, which is where Source Bakery is now and where the glass sailboat was before then. And Ian Sinclair mentions the casual chatter over the fizz of sports screens. I don't remember there being TVs in that venue, but Ian does. The casual chatter over the fizz of sports screens, the sliding and slopping of big jugs, warm pizza wheels, was a revival meeting for whatever Olson and Black Mountain once represented. A seance at which the tapping of shot glasses on circular tables spelled out legends of the departed poet. His incantatory materials of a working, his incantatory letters, the songs made from the raw materials of a working community. The amiable drinkers of alchemy were honoring a sempiternal Olson wake against padlocked fish sheds and failing businesses, the inner and outer harbor. Sinclair gives this sense of something sort of ending in his time, which I feel very differently about. And I think, this as the 14th talk gives that sense of things living still in our engagement with Olson. As I wrap up here, I need to, and then I'll invite David and then Amanda. While creating this talk, I many times paused, and without even realizing it, I would have the immediate thought that I needed to ask Peter something, or I needed to ask Garrett something. In the time period that this talk covers, Garrett Lansing died on February 11th, 2018, at 89 years old, just 2 weeks before his 90th birthday. There's a wonderful remembrance on the Poetry Foundation website that I don't have time to read from right now, by Garrett Caples. And at the end of it, he refers to a particular scene at the run line. And this kind of like joyous celebration of Garrett, and in his sense of this like vivid scene, he makes reference to the poets that are still at it here in Gloucester, and three of them are in the front row here. He mentions by name David Rich, Amanda Cook, and also Jim Dunn in that passage, along with Gay Barboza. And I wanted to mention that as a sort of follow-up as against this sense of something ending, that there's still this tremendous vitality in Gloucester, in the account, and in this kind of afterlife of Charles Olson. So much so, and I didn't mean to mention this, but it just popped into my head, that the other day my daughter was texting a friend before an event to commemorate Garrett Lansing that Henry generously hosted at the Writers Center. And she is texting with one of their closest friends about their favorite Garrett Lansing poems. right? And what should be read that, because one of them couldn't be here for that event. And so, these 18, 19-year-olds who are still at this, right, show that this is live goods that we're talking about here.
So James asked me to do kind of a preamble from 1970 to 1995, a kind of a prologue. Or for you Jonathan Bayliss fans out there, prologos, and like the prologos novel is going to come afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
perfect, right? Yeah. So I guess I was just surprised by just like the vast quantity of material that pertained to Charles Olson in the Gloucester Times from 1970 to 1995. He had already befriended associate editor of the Gloucester Times, Paul Kenyon, prior to his death, in the same way that he had befriended Alfred Mansfield Brooks of the Cape Ann Historical Association, and John Hayes Hayman Jr. of Hayman Castle. And his letters to the editor had appeared in the paper and were just always so carefully reproduced in terms of their lineation and spacing, very important for his poetics. So when he did die in 1970 in January, there was just a really large amount of focus and verbiage. But it's all very interesting, and it was quite well done. And so the front page of the Gloucester Times on January 12th of 1970 was a big photograph of him, and the front page, and then the half of the back page was a very well done biography, very very detailed in terms of every phase of his life, from his education, his graduate work, his collecting the 95 kind of lost Herman Melville books, the books from Melville's library that had been dispersed, and he collected them, fellowships that he'd received, teaching at Black Mountain College. So it was very well done, and it seemed to be it was working from a resume that Olson had given him or something prior to his death. It was very well done, and even his poetics was talked about in a cogent way. So the Gloucester Times said, quote, "Olson saw poetry as a field of force or a high-energy construct, rather than an exercise of words and rhymes," which got kind of cribbed right from the projected verse essay. But the next statement that they make is actually quite spot on and kind of surprising to find, where they said, "The world and everything that happens or has happened in it is an eternal and ever-present event for Olson." His funeral was covered as well, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the circumstances of his funeral, but it really happened at Greeley's funeral parlor, where Father John Roach of Our Lady of Good Voice Church gave the read psalms and prayers, and Allen Ginsberg was there, John Wieners, Joel Oppenheimer, Vincent Farini, Robert Hellman, and they read poems right there in Greeley's front parlor. But what struck me also was that they also didn't really hide the circumstances of Olson's living at 28 Fort Square. There's a photograph that has circulated of Peter Anastas and Vincent in that apartment, kind of looking at things. But that accompanied an article by Donna Smith and Paul Kenyon, really talking about conditions that I think could only be described as squalid, quite frankly. It was an unheated 3-room apartment at 28 Fort Square. He lived in the same way that the Italian immigrants lived around him. The only heat in the apartment was from an oil burner stove, and he had gotten a portable oil burner for the front room, and then there's a third totally unheated room. And there were papers that were stacked probably waist high, all through the room. They said about 10 feet out from the desk on all directions was paper. And so I'm just going to focus on things that are a little bit surprising to me rather than going through a big list. And so I just want to highlight the work of Barbara Gale, who I didn't know personally, but when she graduated from Radcliffe in 1970, she had written a senior thesis on Charles Olson. That was actually quite good, and it was excerpted in the Gloucester Times in 1971. It was the 1-year anniversary of Olson's death. And Barbara Gale talked about Olson's approach to life and art, that the human subject required a contextualizing framework that will give form to experience. within which individual intuition, perception, and action can occur. And really understanding that rather than a lot of what was happening in the 1950s, when Olson was kind of coming of age as a poet, that saw the artwork as entirely autonomous and relating to only other artworks according to form, which you can find in the writings of Hilton Kramer, another Gloucester person. That the artwork and the artist are intrinsically in all ways connected and related to the world beyond the work. Things got strange at the Gloucester Times sometimes, like when James and Virginia Candris, a Greek couple, bought Lufkin's Diner and renamed it the Olympic. The headline was literally, James and Virginia Candris buy diner immortalized by poet Olson, which I thought was totally strange because people in town would know this diner because they went to the diner. But anyway, so Peter Anastas wrote a lot about Olson in the paper all through the 70s and 80s and 90s. And he covered every book about Olson that came out, like every work of scholarship. He worked Olson's name into his own regular column. But I wanted to focus on a couple, and this is kind of setting up Amanda, maybe a couple of dissenting voices that read the Gloucester Times that were fun to find. And I really want to focus on Jonathan Webster. Jonathan Webster wrote a really wonderful piece about going to a Charles Olson event in 1974. And he talks about, and opening up this piece, which I recommend you can find it at the archive of the Gloucester Times online, where Jonathan Webster says it was kind of obligatory to write about Olson if you worked at the Times, which I thought was kind of interesting to see that. And he said that half the people in town thought that Charles Olson was the second coming of Homer, right, the Greek poet Homer. And the other half of people in town thought that Charles Olson was a big fat phony, which I probably did represent local opinion, but it was this fantastic article I hope you go find, where he goes to the Boston Public Library, where there's an event with the poet Joe Dunn, who's reading Charles Olson's poetry, while an avant-garde jazz group is blaring saxophones, and as percussion, they have axe heads on a string, and they're hitting the axe heads while Joe Dunn is reading the Maximus poems. And so I thought that was lovely to find. But Bill Costley, who's a guy, I have no idea who Bill Costley was, but he wrote a letter to the editor in '73 that condemned Olson in the strongest terms. He said that Olson's Gloucester of the Mind was racist and reactionary for focusing on Gloucester's English colonial past while relegating to a few stray appearances the immigrants who both fished and processed fished in Gloucester for the large corporations. And John Christie also had a piece where he talked about Kim Bartlett's book, The Finest Kind, which is an excellent study of fishing out of Gloucester on the Joseph and Lucia vessels owned by the Frank Leone family. And Christie said, in praising Bartlett, he puts down Olson in an interesting way, where he says, in respect to calls for an Olson memorial in town, it is absurd to think that someone whose poetry could keep 100 doctoral candidates busy for a decade, making sense of its obscure references, will do anything but fade in the minds of local people. And as I close, I want to give a shout out to the Cape Ann Historical Association for hosting both Peter Anastas when his book published by Greg Gibson came out, Maximus to Gloucester, but also hosting George Butterick in 1981 when the Guide to the Maximus Poems came out. And there was a show by Lynn Swigert called Olson's Gloucester, a collection of photographs. And George Butterick came in '81 and talked about Olson and also talked about the Guide to the Maximus Poems. And finally, the Gloucester Stage Company, a place where I've worked myself. There was an avant-garde dance troupe in New York that did Apollonius of Tyana at the Amos Eno Gallery. And Israel Horvitz saw this, and he convinced them to come up to Gloucester, and they did it at the Blackburn Tavern Theater. And it cost $5 to go, and there was live music afterwards, and it seemed to be quite a success. So that's where I'm going to stop, and I'll sit down.
I realize at this time some folks, we've hit our time almost to the minute. Yeah, that's pretty good, 3:30. We're gonna I have one question for Amanda and Dave, and then folks want to stay around to open up, but we have hit 3:30, so I know that's what some folks were planning on, so if you need to go, we understand. Thank you again to the Cape Ann Museum for hosting us today and putting this together. Amanda and Dave, thank you for joining me here for this. I realize that for all of us, there was so much more material. We've all had to cut things down quite a bit. And so an account of Peter's passing is something that I realize now that I had cut out of my talk, and the wonderful event at Stage Fort Park after that, that these two people, as I've said before, were such the guiding sort of impulses for my encounter with Olson along the way. I just wanted to name that sort of through line again before asking David and then Amanda this question. I've known both of you since 1995. In that time, I also know, David, I'll start with you. There are so many ways that your interests overlap with Charles Olson's, both archaeological study, the Gloucester research that you've done, even the Newman Shea overlap that I cut from my talk. There's so many things that your interests have overlapped, and yet I want it said here how different your work is from Olson's work on that material. So I was wondering, in the interest again of live goods, if you could talk a little bit about this overlap in material and in your sense of how you handle that material differently.
Well, I guess okay. Does this work?
You're good.
Pretty well?
Yeah.
Are we good? Okay. I'm hearing myself, so it's freaking me out. Well, I guess Charles Olson's focus as a lyric poet was the ambit of his own experience. But in terms of his work on Gloucester, because of his focus on Babson's history, which came out in 1860, that really limited him to a time prior to Gloucester becoming anything like the Gloucester that I would have grown up in. And so he focused on the colonial past. And his own sense of history was really Herodotan, okay, like the Greek historian Herodotus, where history isn't so much a scientific activity of reconstructing the past as kind of mining the past for figures who are almost like moral emblems, symbols of human achievement or human failings. And so he kind of stops right where I think Gloucester gets interesting, because the winter fishing of the 1850s, which is when Gloucester becomes a major port, where you would go out during the winter, very dangerous, which hadn't happened before, and get ground fish and bring it back, and it was quite lucrative, but men died. That began in the 1850s, and a large number of immigrants came to Gloucester at that time from Portugal, Ireland, Canada, later Italy as well. That's in the 20th century. And so I was always concerned about the origin of the Gloucester that I experienced, where people worked in fish processing plants, there was fishing, and the legacy of the industrialized economy, which had kind of broken so many families, but then also the resistance to that, the unionization efforts that built a fishermen's union, a fish processing union. And so it's kind of like Olson's focus on the early period of Gloucester exclusively. He kind of kept himself out of what I think is the most epic period of Gloucester history. So my focus would be on industrialization, immigration, and unionization.
Terrific. Thank you, David. Amanda, I have the same question for you. Again, the overlaps, which we heard in your poems earlier today, but I wonder again, you sharing this material, how you conceptualize yourself dealing with those materials differently from how Olson approaches them. I think this won't reach, so
Okay. I'm gonna go for
I'm at
this
the end
one.
of my tether.
I think that we shared a lot of people and a lot of places. It's off? Okay.
That better? There we go.
Yeah.
I guess our overlap is nouns. The people I love are of the people that he loved, or loved him, either as a writer or just as a figure, a person in this place, and sharing places, sharing stories from different generations, but different points of perspective. Sometimes when I read a poem I'm about to react to, I'm just like, where did you get this? And then as I get into it, I can sort of feel where it is, where it comes from. I think that kind of gets away from the question a little. But, so the overlapping, I think it's kind of a conversation more than anything else, where I'm taking what he says and talking back, sometimes asking questions, sometimes I'm like a teenager and I'm just like, no, like we're not doing this. But it's funny, reading from the start to the finish, I hadn't really done that since I started the project, and in the past, preparing for this, it really does feel like growing up in the conversation. And that's where the overlap, I think, is. In the beginning, I was really annoyed, like really kind of just pissed off at how much this man had taken over my creative life, and the things that I was dealing with, the people who I was meeting, how it was always under this shadow, and how oppressive that was. And I think that's changed as the project has come on. And I think he changed as he was writing it too, so it's sort of a natural progression, that overlap.
Thank you. No, that's terrific. I think that, in that sense, I've talked about with both of you the way the Maximus poems themselves do change from scolding us at the beginning, right? Gloucester being scolded, the hectoring of the early poems do this, and there is more of Garrett's version, the sacramental attention in later poems. And that's something we've talked about before. So the poems evolve, you evolve in relation to them as well. That's wonderful to hear. I know there's so many people here. Folks who may want to leave, but with this, I'm curious to hear from people and what questions you may have for the three of us, since in this room are many of the people who are part of the live goods aspect of Olson's legacy that carries on in 2026. So. And I also mentioned many of you in the talk, so you may have something to say about yourselves. So I wanted to open things up, and then I can bring the mic around. If Amanda takes my spot, I'll take the mic.
I think Henry has.
Amanda,
Yeah.
so you have finally learned feedback is not good. That it's not bad to be pissed off.
Henry, leave me alone.
Oh, no. All of us have to be pissed off. We live in a very pissed off world right now. So we got to learn to take that energy and focus it against that.
I think I was pissed off the whole time, though. I don't think that's the lesson I learned. I think I started there. I think I started there. Does anybody have any?
Mic over.
Yep.
Amanda, could you give us the name of that zine where we can find your published versions?
The magazine is called Spoke. Kevin Gallagher here. He's actually probably responsible for most of the writing that's happened, because if I didn't have a deadline, I don't think I'd get anything done. So his serializing of the letters to Maximus is really important. It spoke. I think you can order all the issues online. SpokeBoston.com. And it's an incredible magazine of just incredible writers. He does an incredible job.
Anyone else? Questions for any of the panelists here? Peter?
Just a general comment, but listening to you all talk, and Amanda, listening to your poetry, I don't know if you know Grace Raff, but she actually wept during your reading. And I think it was just her imagining you in Gloucester. And, but the idea that Olson set a spirit in Gloucester that was taken up by so many people, and it has to do with finding ways to engage this world and this community in creative ways, in literary ways, and the way that you all devoted yourself to it, to me, very inspiring. Makes me just want to try to continue with that.
Thank you. Another thing that I forgot to mention is Henry. You got some books there, right?
We do.
When something I cut from my talk is one of the books actually has some of Amanda's work in it as well. I meant to wave it around from the podium, but Henry will wave it around for you. So since there was a question about how to get some of the poems, in addition to Spoke, we've got that. Thank you, Henry. Anyone else? Questions for any of the panelists or any comments? Oh, Danusha.
I'd like to mention, well, first of all, thank you for presenting us with this wonderful series of information and thoughts, and I'm really grateful. But I'd like to share a little vignette from the 1995 celebration. It was a huge thing. I remember how people were coming from the North Station, from Boston, and so on. But I have a little unfinished business and a question for you. Steve Scotty, remember the musician? He declaimed a beautiful poem about a black man. Olson's poem, and I could not find it anywhere. I thought I did, and then I somehow think lost it. So if any of you have it, it's a really beautiful, not long, beautiful poem. Thank you.
Hopefully you can find it for you, Danusha. Thank you. And in the zines that I showed earlier, one of them that I put together, there is some of your work in there as well, from back in one of that time period, as there is with many other people in the room. Anything else before? Oh.
That was wonderful. It's really wonderful to see how literary history gets made and literature keeps from dying. And I do feel that not just in Gloucester, it is in part a matter of place. So obviously we have a huge and fantastic literature of nomadism in a world full of refugees and terrible wars now, and that's remarkable stuff too, but I bet every one of those people wants to be in their place, writing about their place. So it was really moving in a million ways and inspiring, even to those of us who are displaced. We can't ever quite be what you are, Amanda, but I did have to notice, just because I'm female, that the only female name that was mentioned this afternoon was Amanda's. And I'm curious about that. Was that just the case? There were no women writers over the course of that last
There
50 years?
There were some other females mentioned. Hetty Jones and Charters.
Barbara Gale was mentioned.
Barbara Gale. But I will say that in experiencing this world of Olson, a big part of what led to my project was that the Writers Center asked me to lead a reading group for women for Olson. And I was like, fuck. How do I do that when I haven't dealt with this myself? And I really hadn't. Like there was a line that I read where I've spent more time listening to men talk about Olson than I have reading Olson. And that was, there couldn't be a truer line in the whole thing. And there's definitely this, it's not that the women aren't doing it, they're maybe not talking so much about it. And I'm just thinking back when I was about to start that sentence, I was thinking about who's given these lectures. And I'm thinking about Hetty Jones, Ann Charters, Diane DePrima, Miriam Nichols, and Waldman, that it has been maybe one of the best representation of women in poetry that I could imagine. And I hadn't even thought about that until now. And I did take a strong offense in the beginning to Olson writing about the islands of men and girls. And that was one of the things that ticked me off so much in the beginning. Just this sort of lack of understanding about how much women keep the whole thing going. And I
was just thinking that, the glass slipper, and there are these public places where male poets get together and hang out and build. And women there can be referred to as girls.
Yeah.
They're not among the men in this story. I mean, I'm not talking about this very moment, but in this story, that really is helpful. It's partly the sociability issue.
Yeah, and I think that for each of the women that I mentioned, Diane DePrima was fierce in setting herself apart from other women, I would say. Hetty Jones and Ann Charters were very generous in talking. Ann is one of my favorite humans to this day, and how generous she is in talking about things and talking about her time with Olson. But she gave me a really good insight into him and the way he treated her. And she spent a lot of time around a lot of male writers. And she said that Olson was always a gentleman to her and always treated her with respect. And that gave me a little bit more patience with him. Just because I think approaching him through the work is sometimes harder because it is so male dominant. But having that personal experience of someone saying, no, he was really generous and open and supported me, that helped me maybe lower my shoulders a little bit and get a little bit out of a fighting pose.
Yeah, imagine how if there was more of that.
Yeah.
Much lower all our shoulders.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Thank you very much. I remember talking to you a few years ago when you were just starting and you were very pissed off. It's really great to see.
Yeah. I think, we can all do the part where we talk in small groups now until we get, I think the shuttle runs till 4:30, so if you're parked in the parking lot, the shuttle runs till 4:30, the museum's open until 5, so we can mill about until then as needed.
Thank you, everyone.